In this video, we will continue our discussion on UI elements, and then we will talk about different layouts like constraint layouts and relative layouts and linear layouts. We will start by adding an image view in our text view. Let's delete this and let's change this to a relative layout. In here we type simply image view. For the width I'm going to pass 100 dp and for the height 100 dp as well. An ID for it, let's call it image view. Also I can set some default value to my image view. For example, by typing src, which stands for source, I have access to all the images and other files that I have currently on my project. And as you can see there, as default, there are some files on my project. If I type IC launcher, I can see that there is some image in here that I can use as my default image view. Also, if we want to add another image from our computer or somewhere else, we can come to this res folder, which stands for resources. In this drawable folder, we can right click on it, and to this new tab I can say new image asset. In this window we can choose the type of our icon or our image. For example, I can choose action bar and tab and icons. In here I have different options. For example, in this clip art, I can click on this clip art and I can choose between the different icons that are currently and freely available for me in this window. For example, let's choose this alarm and let's call it IC alarm. IC stands for icon alarm. I can add some paddings to it, or I can change it to some another color. For example, I'm going to change it to black. By clicking on next and finish, it will create some PNG files, as you can see in here. And if you notice, there are different qualities that my image is my PNG file is being created for. We will talk about all these HDPI and XHDPI and others in its time, but for now we just need to know that if we create our icon and our images this way, it will generate us some different images with different qualities. Now by hitting finish, I have that image asset, and in here, if I want, I can delete this source and let's say alarm. Now I have access to that drawable IC alarm icon that I just created. I have an extra R in here. Okay, you can see that I have the alarm icon. Also, if I want to add some image from my computer or somewhere else, I just need to copy that image and paste it in my project. For example, I have an image in here. I can copy it from my desktop by copying it and opening this project in this map folder in resources. I can paste it in here. It will be saved under the name that I give it in here. I'm going to name it Android icon. Notice that you shouldn't enter any spaces or weird characters in here. And as you can see, here's the path that this image, this PNG file will save on your device if you want to access to that file from your Explorer. Click on this OK, and then you have your image asset. Now if I want to access to that image asset, I can say Android icon. It's in my map folder. Now I have that icon. Also, if I change this to wrap content and this one to wrap content, I will have my original image size. I can define the image view in Java core as I defined every other elements in this Java core. For example, I can say private image view. We need to initialize it in this onCreate method. We'll cast it. Now we have access to this image view and we can do whatever we want from here. For example, we can change its visibility to gone instead of visible. There are some other methods to this image view. For example, this set image URI. We will talk about this URI when we will work with files, and probably before that. URI basically is the path to the file that has been saved on the user's device. We will pass this URI dynamically and the image view will be updated. Or we can pass some URL in this image view and our image will be updated dynamically from internet. Okay, I think that's enough about image views. Up until now we have worked with this relative layout. Relative layout means that everything is related to another element. For example, this image view is inside this parent view. And if we have some buttons, for example, we can say it should be below our image view or wherever we want. Its location in our screen is related to this image view, and wherever this image view is, our button is going to be below that. This is the definition of relative layout. It has many flexibilities, and I think we will work with relative layout for the entire course, but we will talk about constraint layout and others as well. For example, let's change this to constraint layout. But in constraint layout, we cannot use this attribute layout below. Instead, we need to create some constraints for our layout, and I think the best way to do that is from in here from this design mode. Let's drag our button in here. I think we have seen constraints before in our initial application that we have created. We can add some constraints from, for example, this part to the edges of our screen, or from here to the bottom of our screen. Let's change the width of our layout so we'll be able to see all the constraints. For example, in here I'm going to change it to 100 dp, or it seems really small, so let's say 200 dp, and for the height as well 200 dp. Now in our design mode, I can constraint it to other edges of our device as well, or our screen as well. Basically, constraint means that where our element in the runtime is going to locate in our screen. For example, now that I have constrained it to the 4 edges of my screen, I know for sure that it will be at the center of our screen. Also, I can constrain this button so that it will be located to the bottom of this image view and to the left of this image view. For example, like this. And as we have seen before, we can add or remove some margins. From top, I'm going to give it some margin. Also, let's give it some constraint to the right of our image view so it will be centered. Okay, there are different ways of constraining. For example, if I come to here, and I can see that it's on fixed. If you hover it, its constraint is fixed. If I click once in them, I can see that it will change to match constraint, which will match the parent. The constraint will match the parent. And if I change it once again, I can see that it will change to wrap content. There are some slight differences between these, and you will notice when you work with these but for now, because we have a simple layout, we won't understand it too much. Okay, that's all about constraint layout. It is new. It has been recently introduced in Android Studio 2.3, I guess, and also it has some bugs as well. But if you want to work with this design view, the most comfortable thing to work with is this constraint layout. Also, we have a linear layout in here as well. But before that, let's delete these two elements. Let's change this constraint layout to linear layout. But when we use linear layout, the first thing that we should do is to give it some orientation. And we will see what is that about. For now, I'm going to give it a vertical orientation. In linear layout, everything will be shown in different lines. For example, if we set its orientation to vertical, every element will be shown below the previous element. For example, if I have a text view in here, let's give it a text. Now if I define another text view, it will automatically come below this previous text view. For example, let's say hello. Let's say text hello. You can see that in here, if I zoom in a little bit, these are vertically after each other. Or if I change it to horizontal, the lines will be horizontal. It will come after it, to the right of it. And also there is another thing in linear layout. I can give different weights to my elements in linear layout. For example, let's give it some weight. In here I'm going to give it 2. Let's change this to text view as well. In here let's give it some weight as well. I'm going to make it 1. It's not clear right now. Let's give it some background as well. It is another attribute. As you probably guess, it will give some background to our element. Let's say color accent for the first one, and a background color primary for the second one. Now that I gave it the weight of 2 for the first element and the weight of 1 for the second one, it will sum up the weight that I gave to both of them. For example, in here it's 3, and then it will divide the screen between these two elements by the value that their weight has. For example, in here this element is occupying twice space as this one. Or if we change it to vertical, we can see it much better in here. The first one has the weight 2, the second one has the weight 1. Okay, there is not much more to linear layout. I just wanted you to get familiar with some of the vocabularies like linear layout and weight, because you might see them. But notice that no matter if you use relative layout, constraint layout, or linear layout, or as we will discuss in future videos, a coordinate layout, no matter you use which one of them, the result will be the same, and it's all dependent to your taste and which one you are comfortable with. I'm more comfortable with relative layout, so I will continue my works in this course with relative layout. Before we finish off this video, let's have a quick look at some other onClickListeners of the views in Android. For example, we have seen some until now. We had a button, for example. Let's give it an ID, btn start. We can give it some text from here. Let's say start, and we could pass some onClick in here. And then we will define our method in here. For example, let's say public void start we should pass a view in here, and this is the method that will run when we click on the button. But there are some other ways to simulate the on-click of the button. For example, let's define our button in here, private button btn start. Let's initialize it in here. Btn start. Let's delete this method in here. From this onCreate, after the initializing of our button, I can say btn start dot set onClickListener. Basically, an onClickListener is some piece of code that will listen to the click action, the click events to your button. In here, inside these parentheses, we need to pass some interface. For that, I'm going to pass new onClickListener, new view.onClickListener. You can see that the first one is view.onClickListener. By clicking enter on it, it will generate me this onClick method. Now this is the method equivalent to this method that I just created and deleted down in here. I can do whatever I want in this method. This is another way of defining onClickListeners for our button, or basically every views in Android. You can set an onClickListener for image views as well, for text views, and basically all the elements that you have in your UI element list. There is another way to define an onClickListener. For that, we need to implement our interface in here, implement onClickListener, and of course we need to implement the method as well. For that, I can press Ctrl I and implement the onClick method. This is the equivalent to these two methods that I just created and deleted. But now I need to pass the my button or my view dot set onClickListener, and I need to pass the main activity or the class that is implementing this view.onClickListener interface. For that, I'm going to pass this. We know that this refers to the object that we are currently in, which we are currently in this main activity object. We know that classes are objects. In here, we need to act upon this ID of this view that we are passing to this onClick method, and let's type what I mean. We can define a switch statement which will act on v.getID, which is the ID of the view that is being passed. In case it's r.id. Let's say btn start, we will do something. The code that we will write in here, in this case, will be equivalent to the method that we just created and deleted, and also the onClickListener that we just created and deleted. The advantage of this way of implementing onClickListeners is that we can define different onClickListeners for different elements at once. For example, if we had another button, we could add some another case to this switch statement, and simply by addressing the ID of that element, we could have an onClickListener. Okay, this video is getting long. We have talked a lot in this video. We will continue our discussion on user interface in the next video, so see you in that next video.